When we were coming to France, one of our biggest concerns was what the school experience would be like, and would our daughter adjust well to it?
In this video, we're going to talk about what it's been like here in France in the French school system over the past 18 months.
And so that you know where we're coming from, in the US, we were part of a large urban school district in elementary initially, and then later a smaller, very well-funded suburban school district.
Yeah, we came to France in our daughter's first year of middle school, and while we've been here, she's been in both a public French school and a private French school. And today we're going to talk about things about the school system that have really impacted our daily lives here.
Right. So we can only speak to our experiences, but what we hope is that if you are exploring France, this may give you some insight that could be helpful. Okay, we're going to start with vacation time, because why else are you moving to France?
Yeah, so in the US, the standard is school starts in August, it ends at the end of May. You've got 2.5 to 3 months off in the summer. You've got breaks for Christmas and Thanksgiving and spring break and random days sprinkled throughout.
The big difference in France is your summer vacation is going to be a little shorter. They're going to get out like the first week in July, but they've got 2-week vacations, either every 6 weeks to every 8 weeks throughout the year, every season.
Really nice. We've really liked it so far. Having those regular weeks off throughout the year has given us the opportunity to kind of do things and go places off season and away from the crowds and tourist times. We were able to go to Budapest to trick or treat. We were also able to go to Athens and see the Parthenon at a time when it wasn't 1,000,000 degrees and everyone in the world wasn't at the Parthenon with us. So that was really nice. And another really big benefit, though, was Juliana, our daughter, really benefited from this. You know, it's hard going into a new school, a new system, a new language. And having some regular breaks, some long time off, not just a weekend, but 2 full weeks to kind of decompress and get over and reset was really valuable. So we like the vacation schedule.
So the next thing that might change a little bit here from the US is daily schedule. In the US, we were very used to having shorter school days, 5 days a week. The school day in France looks a little bit more like the US workday. So think maybe 8 a.m. to 4:30, or Juliana goes to school till 5 right now. But kids in elementary school are usually always off on Wednesdays, and then in middle school and high school, often it's a half day they're off on Wednesdays. So a little different.
Yeah, depending on your situation, you might feel differently, but we've really liked it. I think the longer days fit up neatly with a regular work-life schedule.
Let's just be honest.
Yeah, you've got things to do during the day. I don't need to stop at 2 o'clock to go pick up my wonderful child. So that's really nice, having kind of a longer, regular day.
Yeah. And on Wednesdays, you know you've got that day for doctor's appointments. Sometimes we've gone to do something fun on Wednesday afternoons. The flip side of that is if you have something else to do on Wednesday afternoons,
you got to figure it out.
You got to figure it out. So no after school care really, but then you've got Wednesdays to figure that out. I will say sometimes though you'll see, just like you would expect, the Maries might have programs. The Marie is the town hall for Wednesdays, or a lot of kids we see do their extracurricular activities that day. So, yeah.
Okay, testing. So what is testing like? Well, in the US, standardized testing is very common. It varies from state to state and grade to grade, but it's a big thing. You spend a lot of the year focused on these tests that are coming later. That's very different here in France. There is one standardized test. When you are graduating middle school or college and going on to high school, you have to pass the brevet test. That's really the only mandatory standardized test that there is. There's another one when you're graduating high school and moving on to university. The bac is an option. That's a little like the SATs, and only if you want to go on to university.
The interesting thing with this is you might be asking, well then, do they test the kids? And the answer is yes. But while the curriculum across France is very standardized, it's a centralized national curriculum, the way they test that is actually, as far as we've seen, pretty much up to each individual teacher.
Yeah.
So just like think of your university days in the US where, you know, some teachers like giving a pop quiz every Friday and other teachers, you know, give you one test at the end of the year and that's your whole grade. So it's very similar. But the other thing about this that we really appreciated was that flexibility meant that the first year we were here, Juliana's teachers were amazing about adjusting the tests to accommodate her language ability. And that just took an incredible amount of stress off of her.
Yeah.
So, for example, they would do things like one of her teachers allowed her to do a presentation that was an oral presentation later in the year. Another one this year in her French literature class, they're reading Lord of the Flies, and that was still too high a level of writing for her to read reading comprehension in French. So her French teacher said, that's fine, you read it in English, but you'll participate in the discussion in French.
Yeah.
So that flexibility has been
Fantastic.
yeah, pretty awesome.
So grading, what about grading? How does grading work?
Yeah.
So in the US, you might be familiar, grading typically is on a up to 100 scale, 100 being the best, 70 being passing. Often you'll see the letter grades as well, and an A, B, C, D. There are no letter grades in France. Instead, the number system is 0 to 20, 20 being the best, 0 being the worst. To pass, you only need a 10. So 10 and above, you pass. Hey,
50%.
that's fantastic. I wish that was always that
I know
way.
more than half of
Yeah.
whatever was on the test.
Yeah. In addition to that slight change in the numbering system, though, in France, on your report cards, you'll get written commentary from all of your teachers as well as the principal of the school. This might be on your effort, your demeanor, you know, how hard you're trying. And that's really important, this written part
Yeah.
of your grading system.
Of your total grade.
Yeah. It provides a very holistic measure of how you've done that year. It's not just the grades on your tests and your weekly work, but it's their kind of opinion on how you're doing.
Right. This was big, for example, for Juliana, the first year we were here, as you can imagine, her grades in 6th grade French were terrible.
She didn't speak French.
Right. So, and that made sense. But her teacher actually put notes about how she was approaching things, the progress she could see, her attitude, and that went with her to the school that she's at now that we had to apply to, and they were able to see all of that and put it in context. The other thing that is really different here that we thought was interesting and we wanted to note that we've just seen as a cultural difference is in the US, in our experience, grades were always treated as somewhat confidential, right? The only person who might share those is, you know, the kid or the parent themselves with someone else. It's been very different here.
It's very open.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what everyone else made. They discuss it openly.
Class average.
Yeah,
Juliana said last week a kid got handed back a test and he's just like, hey, how come I got an 11.5? And him and the teacher just talked about it like right there in the middle of the class, and the whole class had a discussion and kind of joked about it, and it's
a whole different approach. Very comfortable just knowing what everyone else is doing. That's just something to be ready for.
Right, because, and I mean, for better or worse, depending on your kid and depending on how they feel about this, for Juliana, I think it has been, you know, if you went to college and you took those tests and you did really bad, even though you're like, I felt prepared, I thought I studied. And then the instructor will say like, everybody did bad. And you're like, whew, okay,
goodness.
not just me. So it's a little bit of the same thing here.
Yeah.
They'll find out the class average and then they kind of understand where they stand. And for Juliana, that's been comforting because sometimes she knows like, it wasn't just me, this was just a hard test or there was an issue or like whatever. And all of us kind of did bad. And then the other thing is like, she just always knows where she stands because they know the class average. So she kind of has an idea, is she doing well? Does she need to study more?
Yeah.
So there's some context, but it's very different than the way we've experienced that in the US.
Definitely.
So building on the whole openness around grades would be the culture of critique in France that feels very different than the US.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think in the US that criticism or critique in general, or feedback, or there's lots of words for it, but it has a very negative connotation.
Like you did something wrong if you get that.
You definitely did.
Right.
So much so that we often wrap it in praise. We try to figure out ways to say it, to give feedback or critique. And we do it often in a way that completely obscures the point of the feedback.
Right.
That is not a problem here in France.
Oh, no.
It's very direct,
Yeah.
very straightforward, and there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
It's a common thing to get feedback, critique, criticism on your efforts at school.
Right. Which, I mean, we wanted to talk about this because I think it can be really jarring if you are coming from a culture like the US, where we are like, focus on the positive, play to your strengths. Like, it's just a very different, whereas...
It's hard to hear you don't do that well. You did not do this.
Yeah.
You need to do this better.
Yeah. But the thing that I think we really want to get across is that the French are looking at this as an opportunity to improve because they see potential.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't say anything about you as like a person and you're not doing well enough. It's, I've heard someone actually describe it as they can see that there is potential for like growth and to get better. And so it is worth the time to give you that feedback so that you know that and you can then build upon that. So it's just a very different approach, but it can feel, I think, especially for maybe a kid coming from the US, like, why is this teacher being mean to me? I mean, just to be frank. And so I think that's just something you want to be prepared for. And I'm not saying every single teacher does this. Juliana has had teachers that were like that and teachers that were not, but it is far more prevalent here than, I mean, it would be hard for me to imagine some of her teachers in the U.S. being as direct as some of the ones.
And you just have to embrace it and kind of figure out what's the best way for me and my child to work with this.
Exactly, yeah.
Extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
This is a big one in the U.S. There is a lot of extracurricular focus in the U.S. And for myself, I played baseball for a long time. That was a big part of my schooling experience. For Juliana, she was a theater geek. She loved theater. That was a big part of how she associated at school. Here in France, that's a little different. There just isn't the focus on some of these extracurricular activities. There's a much more stronger focus on the academics.
Right.
That's the point of school.
Yeah, exactly.
Schools do have different clubs, right? There are options. There's theater, there's music, there's art. There's a variety of sports, but it isn't a culture. There isn't a whole organization around it.
Think of it more as, like sometimes there might be a club that your kid does after school, and it's like loosely sponsored by a teacher or a parent who gives some time.
They use school facilities, but it's not really a school thing.
Right. So like at her last school, there was several things that would meet because they had a 2-hour lunch. And so some kids, like you'd have lunch and then you would do one of your clubs, but it wasn't like, there definitely wasn't the same kind of
larger culture and organization around it. It's not like part of the school.
Right.
It's not a football school. It's not a baseball school. It's not a theater school. It's just different.
Yeah. So, for better or worse around this, I think one thing that we've noticed is that it takes out some of that stratification that you start to see happen in middle and high school, where it's like, oh, they're a band geek, oh, they're a cheerleader, oh, they're a jock, because there just aren't those things to like stereotype and categorize people into. So there's definitely still friend groups. Juliana has her friend group, but they're just sort of organized around different things, or I guess, common shared interest, or you happen to have the same prof principal, which would be like the homeroom, and sit next to each other. So it's just a little different. And there are still activities. It's just often you find those outside of school that you do on Wednesday afternoons or on Saturday mornings, maybe within your community.
Those activities are there. They're just often outside of school.
Yeah. And as a last note, they're usually very affordable, I will say.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
It's a big difference than in the US.
So this is all just based on our own experiences. We can't speak for all of France and every school. But it was so hard when we were getting ready, and even when we had just put foot on the ground here, to figure out what was the school system like. How can we project ourselves into that? What is it going to be like? How are we going to like it?
Yeah, really just how would daily life as parents of a kid in school be similar or different to what we'd experienced in the US. Speaking of which, if you are curious about our daughter's perspective of this experience, she's made a couple of videos that we will link to here. You can watch if you're interested, and otherwise, we'll see you soon.
A bientôt.
Bye.